This was not the first time he'd gone missing, nor would it be his last. But this time he was seriously lost. 14 days in the wilderness, no trail, no food, no compass, only the raw instinct to survive, and the distant memory of a wife pacing their cabin floor, praying for his return. Again and again he would fall and rise, determined not to die in vain. It appeared to him that if his life had been at stake, he could not have walked another mile. Out of this wilderness walked not just a survivor, but a leader, a man who would help tame the American frontier, a man who would never quit, not in the woods, not in battle, not when the fires of war threatened to burn it all down. Soon he would meet another trailblazer, Daniel Boone. Together they'd carve paths through lands few dared enter, friends, fellow frontiersmen, and the architects of one of the boldest undertakings in American history. Boone would find fame in Kentucky. Robertson, he'd settle Tennessee. While Boone's name lived on in legend, Robertson's faded, his legacy scattered in county names, forgotten statues, and fading maps. Yet it was his grit, his refusal to abandon the fort, that held Middle Tennessee for the fledgling United States. Without him, Nashville would likely have failed. Andrew Jackson may never have come, and the Cumberland may have flown under a Spanish flag. James Robertson, frontiersman, soldier, statesman, entrepreneur, father of 11, husband of 1, native son.
The most central figure to early Nashville was James Robertson. He was an unusual human being. It seems to me that he was as heroic as anybody in that period. In the course of Cumberland settlements, he was wounded 3 different times. One time he almost died, 2 other times he was just badly wounded. He had 2 children killed. One was a 12-year-old son, 2 brothers. He had every vexation connected with leadership you can imagine over a period of 15 years that he had to endure. He was the one who, when other people decided it was impossible to stay here because they couldn't hunt, they couldn't raise food, he said, "I'm not going anywhere." And he kept enough of his fellow settlers here to barely hold on. And that if he had not been able to do that, Nashville wouldn't be called Nashville, I'm sure. Somebody would come along some years later and founded something that would have a different name, different history, different everything. But Robertson is definitely, when they say he's the father of Nashville, he is that and is deeply inscribed in history as you can be inscribed in history.
Felix Robertson. My grandfather, John Robertson, was a native of Ireland. His father was a native of Scotland.
The Robertsons likely came from Perthshire, ancient Highland ground where clan loyalty once meant survival. By the early 18th century, that world was collapsing. British rule dismantled clan society. Land was seized. Customs were suppressed. For many Scottish families, survival required departure. Ulster, Northern Ireland, offered land and a temporary refuge. The Robertsons were not alone. Thousands followed the same path. The British experiment in Ulster failed. Poverty returned, pressure mounted. Across the Atlantic, America promised something different. Cheap land, religious freedom, distance from authority. North Carolina welcomed them.
I am unable to state the time of my grandfather's removal to North Carolina, nor my father's age at the time, only that he was quite young. When they moved from Virginia, they settled low down in North Carolina, and in a few years moved up to Wake County.
There his parents purchased a 320-acre farm tucked in the bend of the Neuse River. Both of James Robertson's parents died while he was still young, leaving 8 children. The burden fell to him to raise the family. He became head of the household not by ambition, but by necessity. Responsibility came early, and it never left. At 26, James Robertson married Charlotte Reeves, daughter of Mary Jordan and the Reverend George Reeves.
My impression is that my father never went to school. My mother, after their marriage, was his sole teacher. His education was limited. He was a ready writer, but wrote a bad scrawl and spelled badly.
Elizabeth Cheatham. I remember him as unusually quiet and thoughtful, and full of the cares of his business.
Strongly built, broad shoulders, heavy brows, shading pale blue eyes. A man slow to speak, careful in judgment, known not for display but restraint. Life in rural North Carolina grew intolerable. Sheriffs inflated fees, court clerks manipulated costs, land agents twisted titles, taxes rose, services vanished. Justice became something purchased. The settlers did not call themselves rebels, they called themselves regulators, men who believed they were restoring lawful order where corruption had replaced it. They were at war with local government. Hillsboro, just 30 miles from Robertson's farm, was the seat of the government. When the courts failed, everyone felt it. Officials were dragged from benches. Edmund Fanning, a local judge, had watched helplessly as his home was ransacked and destroyed. Richard Henderson, one of the associated justices of the province, had his barn and other buildings burned. Out of collapsing authority and corrupted courts, Robertson chose a different answer. He would look west, over the mountains, before British authorities took action. Soon after his departure, then British Governor Tryon sent his troops to put them down. They were shot, hanged, and dispersed. Robertson decided it was time to look west, to leave behind his farm and the life he'd known. He was young, ambitious, and fearless, driven by more than his own fortune. Other families were depending on him to find good land, a place where they could build new lives. And so began his journey across the mountains in search of that promised land. Along the way, Daniel Boone may have accompanied him. The two were nearly simultaneous in their immigration. When Robertson first reached the Watauga Valley in the spring of 1770, he did not find total wilderness. He found a settler already there, a man known as Honeycutt. The valley had been traveled.
With Honeycutt, Robertson planted corn. Corn in the ground meant return. Labor meant claim. Cabin rights were earned, not granted. Robertson prepared the land and then left it, trusting what was planted would wait.
He began his trek home full of hope and determination. He would tell his people he found a rich land suitable for settlement. Felix Robertson.
On his return from Watauga to North Carolina in 1770, he struck through the mountains without a trace of a human foot to direct his course for the heads of the Yadkin.
Edward Swanson.
It being only 4 days' journey, he only took 4 days' provision with him.
The first night after he started, it rained so that he got his ammunition wet, so he could kill nothing, and the weather set in rainy. It was in August, cloudy and rainy, so that he never saw the sun. He wandered 14 days in the wilderness without ever seeing the sun, among rocks and laurel thickets, which at last became so impenetrable that he was compelled to desert his horse.
Being in the mountains so he could not ride, he left his horse and saddle, hanging up his saddle in a tree, and his gun and shot pouch in like manner, and turned his horse loose. And seeing his gun was of no account to him, for his ammunition was wet. He could kill nothing, and he left his gun also.
As long as his strength would permit him, he would gain some summit and climb a tree to be enabled by his position to observe the ranges of the mountains, then descend and again pursue as direct a course as the precipices and thickets would permit. To preserve some knowledge of his route, he cut bushes with his knife to mark his course. Thus he would repeat every day, yet he frequently found that he had crossed his former tracks.
He then traveled 14 days and lived all the time on the 4 days' provision which he took with him from the start, and he seemed doomed to starvation in the midst of plenty for the want of his ammunition and gun.
Again and again he would prostrate himself upon the ground, determined never to rise. But the idea of being lost where no traces of his death would be found, and his death being laid to the charge of Indians, would rouse him. He would slowly rise and again grope his way, as in midnight darkness. In this dreary pilgrimage, he was often, for the moment, near the most ferocious contests between the male bears of the forest, which sometimes occurred almost at his feet. At length, he fell in with 2 hunters of the mountains, who with much difficulty he prevailed on to give him the use of one of their horses for him to ride to the first house.
He then traveled on himself until he got to the house of Hugh McGarry, and when he got there, McGarry took some pains with him until he got him well, for he had like to have starved to death.
He said from the moment he saw them, it appeared to him that if his life had been at stake, he could not have walked another mile. Great self-command was requisite to prevent killing himself when means of appeasing his hunger was placed in his power.
In a few days, comes on one John Hopi with a drove of horses. He got one from him and returned through Johnson County as in North Carolina. In the fall, he got home, and the hunters, having gone out hunting and having found his horse, saddle, and gun, had brought them in.
Being lost and near death in the wilderness did not break him. It hardened his resolve and forged the character he would need for the trials ahead. In October of 1770, James Robertson, his wife Charlotte, their young son Jonathan, and his brothers Elijah and Mark once more turned westward. With a handful of determined families, they crossed the Appalachian Mountains into a land they had only heard described in whispers, the Watauga Valley. The women rode horseback with extra mounts bearing the family's possessions. The men walked alongside with rifles ready for the unexpected. They found a valley cradled by gentle slopes, watched over by towering sycamores along the river's edge. They called it Sycamore Shoals. The Cherokee called it Watauga Oldfields, near the joining of the Watauga and Doe Rivers. Robertson would later say, it seemed to be the promised land. It was here, at the confluence of the Watauga and Doe Rivers, that the Robertsons built their home.
Here, life began again. Just months after their arrival, on December 11th, 1771, Charlotte gave birth to a son, Randolph Robertson. He was their second son, Jonathan being the first. It was a symbol of new life in a new land. But the frontier spared no family from hardship. Not long after, their cabin caught fire. Yet the Robertsons, like their neighbors, rebuilt.
And still, peace, so rare in these borderlands, settled over the valley. For a time, settlers and Cherokee traded, visited, and shared in the bounty of the land. Faith also bound them together.
I recollect hearing my mother say that Boone always stopped with them for some days on his way out and return route from his western hunting excursions. My sister, 9 years older than myself, says that Boone and several of his children were baptized, christened, with her and her 3 brothers at my father's house. She was young at the time, but such events are rarely forgotten.
While James Robertson was settling the Watauga region in 1770, clearing land, building cabins, and shaping a self-governing frontier community, another movement was unfolding just to the north. There, John Donaldson had begun negotiating land on behalf of Virginia. Donaldson was a prominent Virginian, an office holder, an accomplished surveyor, and a seasoned land speculator. Nearing 60 years of age, he was commissioned by Virginia and the British Crown to help establish a formal boundary between colonial settlement and Cherokee land. For 5 months, Donaldson traveled the southern frontier in the company of Attakullakulla, the most noted and respected Cherokee chief of his generation. Known to the English as Little Carpenter, Attakullakulla was far more than a guide. He was a master diplomat, a strategist, and the principal Cherokee voice in treaty negotiations with Britain and the colonies. In the years ahead, he would play a decisive role in the Transylvania Purchase, shaping one of the most consequential and controversial land deals in the American frontier history. Together, Donaldson and Attakullakulla moved deliberately through the mountains and valleys, marking boundaries not with abstract lines, but with the land itself, following ridges, river mouths, and ancient natural markers long known to the Cherokee. The boundary they established would become known as the Donaldson Line. Donaldson later reflected on the country they traversed, writing that it was the Garden of Eden. In 1771, the treaty was finalized and recognized by both Britain and Virginia, but its consequences were immediate and unforgiving. South of the Donaldson Line lay the Watauga settlements. James Robertson and the Wataugans now found themselves outside the law, still living on Cherokee land beyond colonial authority. Order soon arrived. The settlers were formally summoned to remove themselves from the country they had cleared, planted, and defended. With a single treaty, 2 men, who would later stand together in the founding of Nashville, were cast into opposing roles. One had helped draw the line, the other was ordered to abandon everything below it. Yet none of them, Donaldson, Robertson, or Attakullakulla, were finished with this land. The boundary did not end the frontier story. It forced it westward, and in the years that followed, these same men, settler, surveyor, and Cherokee statesmen, would again find their paths crossing as the struggle for the Cumberland Valley reshaped the future of the American interior. Yet beyond these quiet moments, uncertainty pressed in. In 1772, the Indian boundary line was fixed at the Holston River. Settlers north of it came under Virginia's protection. Those south, like the Wataugans, discovered they were in Cherokee territory. Then came the order. Alexander Cameron, British Superintendent of Indian Affairs, warned them to abandon their farms. But there were now 70 plantations here, and the settlers had just planted their crops. They refused to leave. With eviction looming, the settlers turned to diplomacy. James Robertson and John Bean were sent to treat with Cherokee leaders. Under the shade of towering sycamores, they secured a 10-year lease for the Watauga Valley, paying goods worth nearly $1,000. It was a delicate pact, survival for the settlers, sovereignty for the Cherokee. But to British officials like Lord Dunmore, it was an act of rebellion, a dangerous example of Americans governing themselves. After this, the settlement increased with greater rapidity than before, yet they lived in amity with the Indians and enjoyed among themselves the most perfect harmony. And so, in 1772, the settlers went further still. They formed the Watauga Association, a written constitution, the first adopted west of the Appalachians. They elected magistrates, framed laws, and governed themselves with remarkable order. Among the magistrates was James Robertson. Theodore Roosevelt.
They were the first men of American birth to establish a free and independent community on the continent, fit to be the pioneer fathers of a mighty and beautiful state.
In the Watauga Valley, the Robertsons and their neighbors built more than cabins. They built families, faith, and the first seeds of a free government.
Moses Fisk. This became a place of rendezvous to all who followed. At the head of this colony was James Robertson.
Donelson's line not only proved problematic for Robertson and the Wataugans, it inflamed the Shawnee, who were not consulted on the treaty, and they viewed the land as theirs. Conditions on the western frontier worsened as settlers like Daniel Boone moved into Kentucky.
On September 25th, 1773, we proceeded on our journey to Kentuck, in company with 5 families and 40 men that joined us in Powell's Valley. On October 10th, we had passed over Powell's and Walden's mountains and were approaching Cumberland when the rear of our company was attacked by Indians, who killed 6. My eldest son was one that fell in the action. Though we repulsed the enemy, this affair scattered our cattle, brought us into extreme difficulty, and the whole company retreated 40 miles to the Clinch River.
In 1774, war erupted between Virginia militia and Shawnee warriors. Known as Lord Dunmore's War, it marked the first large-scale struggle for control of the Ohio Valley, a contest that would decide who could move west and who would be stopped. By what I can learn, the terrors are so great on the Holston that I'm going to the assistance of the Castlewoods men with the force that could be spared from the district. Daniel Smith to Colonel Preston. On October 10, James Robertson and Valentine Sevier, both sergeants, went out before daylight to shoot a deer and unexpectedly found the Indians advancing in line half a mile from the camp. John Haywood. Edward Swanson. They ran back to the camp and told Colonel Lewis they were soon being attacked, but Lewis said it was only some scouting Indians. Robertson told him he'd seen an acre of ground covered with Indians. 300 men were sent out. Across the river, Shawnee warriors take position. They moved deliberately, no panic, no disorder. Opposing the militia was a disciplined Shawnee force led by Cornstalk, one of the most formidable native leaders of the era. It was one of the hardest fought frontier battles of the 18th century. The Shawnee did not break, they were worn down. The Ohio Valley was not surrendered easily. Lord Dunmore's War forged more than boundaries. It forged relationships. Men who would later shape the Cumberland frontier first learned one another here under fire. These men would later serve beside Robertson as scouts, officers, surveyors, and settlers. Lord Dunmore's War taught frontier leaders a hard lesson. Native resistance was organized, persistent, and capable of stopping settlement outright. The desire for large tracts of western land located in tribal country was on the increase. The most powerful men in America sought them, and all eyes were on this purchase.
George Washington. I can never look upon that proclamation, 1763, in any other light, but this I say between ourselves, than as a temporary expedient to quiet the minds of the Indians, and must fall of course in a few years, especially when those Indians are consenting to our occupying the lands. All this can be carried on by silent management and under the guise of hunting game, which is always admitted by the Indians. By this means, you will be able to mark out the lands in a secret manner, so as to avoid giving alarm or offense. Land speculator Richard Henderson surprised all of his speculator competitors when he arrived at Sycamore Shoals with an audacious plan. He sought to purchase more than 20 million acres of land from the Cherokee, stretching across present-day Kentucky and Middle Tennessee in what would become the largest private land purchase in American history. For months, Richard Henderson and the Cherokee elder Attakullakulla carried the terms of payment from town to town, weighing every rifle, blanket, and kettle.
When the council finally gathered at Sycamore Shoals, more than 1,200 Cherokee and hundreds of settlers filled the river valley. Every soul had to be fed and housed. The treaty was not signed in a moment. It was sustained by weeks of endurance.
At the council stood Henderson, his partners, and James Robertson with the Cherokee. Among them was Atta Kula, the elder statesman, seasoned, diplomatic, and deeply aware of colonial power. Beside him stood his son, Dragging Canoe, younger, defiant, and unyielding. Dragging Canoe rejected the treaty outright. With pathetic eloquence, he dwelt upon the insatiable land greed of the white men and predicted the extinction of his race if they committed the insensate folly of selling their beloved hunting grounds. Roused to a high pitch of oratorical fervor, the savage with uplifted arm fiercely exhorted his people to resist further encroachments at all hazards and left the treaty ground.
Dragging Canoe understood what many colonists refused to admit. This treaty meant war.
A dark cloud hung over that land, which was known as the Bloody Ground.
Standing among the colonists, but not counted among the speculators, was James Robertson. Robertson was not there to acquire land. He was there because families in Cherokee trusted him. He understood both sides of the fire, the promise of settlement and the cost it would demand. Virginia Governor Lord Dunmore declared Henderson and his Transylvania Company outlaws. Soon after, Virginia and North Carolina both ruled the purchase illegal, voiding the treaty and dismantling Henderson's private empire.
Transylvania was dead on arrival. The land deal was too big, too independent, and too dangerous for the colonies to tolerate.
But settlers were already moving. The land had been named, the paths had been cut, and Dragging Canoe's warning would soon be fulfilled. The treaty collapsed, the war did not. But no sooner had the ink dried on the 20 million acre purchase, the Revolutionary War ignited at Concord and Lexington on April 19, 1775. And even though it began in the wealthy northeastern colonies, its effects were felt on the frontiers.
Moses Fisk. Affairs continued prosperous till the commencement of the Revolutionary War. Alexander Cameron sent the Wataugans letters with promises of protection in case of their loyalty to the British, but they unanimously resolved to participate in the struggle for independence. As soon as Cameron ascertained this determination, a sudden incursion was devised, attacking the settlement by surprise on all quarters.
About 2 days after my arrival in West Florida, with ammunition to supply the Cherokee and Creek nations, I was informed of the arrival of Chinkanassina, or the Dragging Canoe, a leader of the Cherokee. His business was to inquire into the cause of the present quarrel of the provinces with Great Britain. Henry Stewart, Deputy Superintendent of Indian Affairs for the Southern District.
The Cherokee are almost surrounded by white people. Our nation has but a small spot of ground left to stand upon. It seems the intention of the whites is to destroy us from being a people. Dragging Canoe.
And so began the loss of peace and friendship with the Cherokee. And once again, the British were behind the call to arms. Thankfully, the settlers had a friend in Nancy Ward, beloved woman of the Cherokee. She overheard the Cherokee plans to invade and sent warnings to the settlers. The intelligence which the inhabitants of Holston received was that 700 Indians had divided into two parties, one to fall on the settlement of Watauga by way of the mountains, the other, commanded by Dragging Canoe, to break up the settlements in and above the fork and proceed northwardly into Virginia. James Robertson saw the danger first.
Felix Robertson. My father had a large stock of horses about 4 miles from his home. One morning, he heard a noise in the river and discovered several canoes full of Indians. On his return, he discovered many signs of Indians. Confident that a large number were in the country, he hastened for the nearest fort, alarming settlers along the way. Tracks of about 100 Indians coming right along the path toward our fort. We are sure they will attack in the morning. We are in good spirits. We hope to give them a warm reception and keep them out until assistance arrives.
On the same day the battle was fought at Long Island Flats, Cherokees attacked the fort at Watauga, in which were James Robertson, John Sevier, and others. They made the attack at sunrise, and were repulsed with some loss. From that time, they skulked around the fort for 3 weeks, till a party from Virginia came to the relief of the garrison and found the inhabitants secure in their fort, the Indians having retreated. John Haywood, 1823.
Pennsylvania Packet, August 17th, 1776. On Colonel William Russell of Fincastle County approaching the Watauga Fort with the men under his command, the Indians retired precipitately, having 1 killed and 2 wounded by a party that pursued them. The fort was relieved after a fortnight's close siege, during the greater part of which our people lived on parched corn. There were supposed to be 500 women and children in this little fort. Except for 4 or 5 who ventured out to drive in some cows, we lost not a man. These were found scalped.
With the onset of the American Revolution, most native nations aligned with the British, longtime trading partners who supplied the goods essential to sustaining their established way of life. The war changed everyone.
Nothing will reduce the Indians so soon as pushing the war into the heart of their country. I would never cease pursuing them while one remained on this side of the Mississippi. Thomas Jefferson, August 5, 1776.
The frontier had crossed a line. Survival now meant offense. It was locked in a cycle of raids and retaliation. Hunters were killed, horses stolen, and trust collapsed on both sides.
Felix Robertson. For 4 or 5 months, the Indians were killing the hunters and stealing horses. My father and John Sevier often went out with the men and killed a great many Indians.
When the Cherokees sent a flag of truce, James Robertson agreed to meet, hoping the violence could still be stopped.
They expressed a great desire for peace, and my father went to treat with them. After many days of council, it appeared nothing could be done. The men grew discouraged and left, until none remained but my father and 1 other.
As night fell, the council reached a decision.
Just before sundown, he was seized and placed in prison.
That decision was death.
After some hours, an Indian woman, the wife of a half-breed, came secretly and told him the council had determined he should be shot. She opened the door and sent him away. By her kindness, his horse was ready. He mounted, plunged down a precipice into the river, and as he gained the far bank, the war whoop rose behind him. He heard them close behind him until he had gone several miles. Avoiding the common road, he did not reach home until the 3rd day, without food or sleep. His wife was in great anxiety and alarm, he having been detained longer than expected.
By the autumn of 1776, frontier violence had hardened into open war. In response, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina launched coordinated campaigns against the Cherokee Nation. Virginia militia under Colonel William Christian crossed the French Broad and Tennessee rivers, advancing into the overhill towns. Once again, future leaders would share the stage. John Donaldson was recruited to lead a company of men from Virginia. James Robertson had command of a company of about 80 men, and John Sevier led a company. Expecting battle, they instead found villages abandoned, families having fled into the mountains and downriver to protect women and children.
Colonel William Christian. I moved through the towns and met with no opposition. The Indians had run off hastily, carrying away their clothes and the best of their goods, but leaving behind their corn. I believe the old warriors and all the women in the nation were averse to the war. Dragging Canoe was the principal agent in hastening the war. I am now destroying his towns, and I intend to destroy some other of the towns that were under his influence, particularly a town in which a man taken at Watauga was burned.
Before a single boat was built, before a trail was taken west, the future of the Cumberland was already being decided, quietly, deliberately, and not always in the open.
In the summer of 1777, leaders gathered on Long Island of the Holston, a place sacred to the Cherokee, set apart for council, peace, and judgment. Here, commissioners from Virginia and North Carolina met with Cherokee leaders to end a brutal war. Then, near the council ground itself, a Cherokee headman, Big Bullet, was murdered. By every law of diplomacy, the talks should have collapsed. They did not. The Cherokee chose restraint. The commissioners chose silence. Peace, all agreed, mattered more than justice.
This moment tells us something critical about Cherokee diplomacy. This was not weakness, it was a political decision, the preservation of peace over retaliation.
The war ended. The arguments did not. North Carolina demanded that the Watauga and Nolichucky settlements, already occupied by white families, be included within the new boundary. The Cherokee refused. Those lands lay too close to their towns, too close to their hunting grounds, too close to home. They did not raise cattle. They followed deer, buffalo, and seasons. A farmer's boundary was a hunter's starvation. Virginia, focused on access to Kentucky and the Cumberland Gap, was prepared to approve the line. North Carolina was not.
Imperial lines were easy to draw. They were nearly impossible to enforce, especially in a landscape governed by movement, not fences.
North Carolina argued the Cherokee had once offered a 10-year lease. Proof, they said, that settlement had been permitted. The Cherokee countered that no such lease had ever been approved, and that hunting land could not be leased like pasture. North Carolina pressed harder. The Cherokee, they said, had started the war. They had allowed settlers to remain even after provincial authorities denied permission. Once war began, North Carolina claimed, those settlers were taken under its protection. The frontier, they argued, could not be unwound. The Cherokee held firm. They would wait, they said, for George Washington to decide where the line should fall. Peace was preserved. The boundary remained unsettled.
What happened next did not occur at the council fire. There was no belt exchange, no witnesses called forward, no line drawn on a map. It happened instead in the margins of the treaty, between men who understood that peace, once signed, would move faster than law. James Robertson, John Donaldson, Richard Henderson. They did not argue whether the Cumberland could be settled. That decision had already been made. They discussed how and who would go first. According to Archibald Henderson, this was the moment when planning replaced speculation, when the Cumberland ceased to be an idea and became an operation.
The treaty itself remained unresolved. Boundaries were still disputed, authorities still uncertain, but the men standing here understood something governments did not. The frontier never waited for permission. They agreed the settlement would not be a rush, not like Kentucky scattered and vulnerable. It would be disciplined, staged, divided by land and water. Robertson would go first, to test the ground, plant corn, and establish presence. Donaldson would follow by river, when the season allowed, carrying families, tools, and survival itself. Henderson would coordinate, finance, and remain just outside the frame of legality.
Historian Samuel Cole Williams notes that by this point, the decision to settle the Cumberland had already been reached. The treaty did not create that decision. It was the backdrop for the deal getting done. Long shrouded in the veil of history, it was here that Henderson, Robertson, and Donaldson determined to settle the French Lick.
The Cherokee finally approved the treaty in July of 1777. They had no choice. They were defeated. James Robertson was appointed Indian agent at the treaty, being the only one they trusted to protect their interests. Conflicted, Robertson accepted the post, but only for a short season. He returned to Big Creek and continued plans to resettle.
James Robertson did not choose French Lick by rumor or accident. He chose it because, for more than a decade, the men who knew the western wilderness best had been quietly mapping it for him. By the early 1760s, a distinct class of frontier explorers, the Long Hunters, had begun operating far beyond the Appalachian barrier. They came chiefly from Pennsylvania, Virginia, and the Carolina backcountry, settling along the upper Holston and New Rivers. Each fall, they departed with pack horses, powder and lead, traps and tools, prepared to live for months and sometimes years beyond settlement. They returned in the spring with furs and with knowledge. These were not settlers, they were scouts, hunters, and pathfinders. Their stories spoke of a land west of the Cumberland Mountains, rich in game, crossed by buffalo roads and ancient Indian traces, a country untouched by fences or farms. Henry Skaggs reached the Cumberland Basin as early as 1762 and stood at a vast salt lick where buffalo gathered in staggering numbers. The hunters called it French Lick. Others followed. James Smith wandered the interior for nearly a year, tracing the Holston, Tennessee, Cumberland, and Ohio rivers, proving the western country was not chaos, but a connected world of waterways. Isaac Lindsay reached the mouth of the Stones River, showing that the Cumberland could be traveled by boat. Then came the great hunting parties: Caspar Mansker, the Bledsoe brothers, Joseph Drake, Uriah Stone. Stone would give his name to the river that flowed upstream from French Lick, the Stones River, a permanent mark of the Long Hunter's passage across the Cumberland frontier. Together they crossed the mountains again and again, rediscovering the salt licks, mapping valleys, and proving that this land could sustain life and trade. Mansker, towering, illiterate, but among the finest riflemen on the frontier, ranged farther than most. On one of his early hunts deep in the Cumberland country, Mansker unexpectedly encountered Piamingo, the powerful Chickasaw chief whose people hunted the region. For a moment, death seemed certain, but Piamingo, measuring the hunter before him, chose restraint. He stripped Mansker of his furs, the season's hardest to earn wealth, but spared his life. It was a lesson the frontier would repeat often. French Lick lay not in empty wilderness, but at the crossroads of Indian power. Yet the Chickasaw did not claim it as a permanent town. It remained a shared hunting ground, open, contested, and unoccupied. The Bledsoes marked their licks. French trader Timothy de Montbrun built a post along the river, opening the country to commerce. Thomas Spencer, a giant of a man, noted for spending a winter in a sycamore tree, gave the French Lick its name after Timothy de Montbrun. By the early 1770s, the valley lay bleached with buffalo bones, the last echo of herds that once darkened the plain. But hunters were not the only men to recognize French Lick's importance. Soldiers soon followed the same path. As the colonies drifted towards revolution, military leaders began to study the western rivers as highways of future war. Among them was George Rogers Clark. Moving through the Ohio and Cumberland systems, Clark learned what the Long Hunters already knew, that whoever controlled the rivers would control the interior of the continent. He saw how the Cumberland cut deep into the southern frontier, how French Lick sat at the meeting of water routes, traces, and hunting grounds, and he acted on it. In a letter to Virginia Governor Patrick Henry in 1779, Clark referred to a tract he had purchased 3 years ago at the Great French Lick, land he described as containing 3,000 acres. He made it clear he could not afford to lose it. This was not casual speculation. Even before his famous Illinois campaign, Clark was securing the strategic heart of the frontier, sites where forts, towns, and supply lines would one day stand. By the time James Robertson weighed his future, French Lick was no mystery. It had been explored by hunters, tested by traders, measured by soldiers. Many of the men who knew it best passed through the same Holston settlements Robertson called home. They told him where the rivers ran, where the buffalo gathered, where danger lay, and where opportunity waited. Once before, Robertson had heard such stories. Once before, men had spoken of a distant valley called Watauga, land beyond the mountains that others said could not be held. And once before, Robertson had gone anyway. He had cut a settlement from wilderness. He had built a community where none had stood before. Now the same pull stirred again. The Cumberland country rose in every account as a richer, wider, and more secure crossroads of river and trace, a place hunters knew, soldiers valued, and traders already used. Now he had to see this promised land for himself, just as he once had with Watauga, only this time he would not go alone. This would not be a lone cabin on a distant creek. It would be a migration. Families, fighters, surveyors, a colony moving as one. The Long Hunters had revealed it. Clark had staked his future. The rivers had opened the road. All that remained was the launch. And in the spring of 1779, Robertson turned his face once more toward the wilderness, toward the salt licks of the Cumberland, toward French Lick, toward the settlement that would become Nashville. The Cherokee Treaty of 1777 started in motion the migration that would culminate in 1779. Boone would head back to Kentucky. Robertson, along with numerous others, began plans to move. But first, two things needed to happen.
By the winter of 1778, British Governor Henry Hamilton believed he could strangle the American West, sweeping down the Ohio, rallying native allies, and crushing Kentucky and the Holston settlements in one great arc of destruction.
But George Rogers Clark struck first.
In February of 1779, through frozen rivers and night marches, Clark captured Vincennes, and with it, Hamilton himself. The British command of the Northwest collapsed in a single surprise blow. Yet even as Hamilton surrendered, another campaign was already moving south.
This campaign meant to break the Chickamauga Cherokees. Dragging canoes war towns along the Tennessee River near modern-day Chattanooga, who had become the British spear point against the frontier.
Robertson had suggested the campaign to North Carolina Governor Caswell in his resignation letter, and Governor Patrick Henry ordered Colonel Evan Shelby into motion. Volunteers poured in. No draft was needed. 500 volunteers, men from Watauga and the Nolichucky, took up rifles without pay. On April 1st, their rendezvous formed at Long Island and the mouth of Big Creek, at Robertson's home and fort, where boats were built from felled poplar trees, flatboats, pirogues, long canoes.
In early April of 1779, the flotilla pushed down the swollen Tennessee River. At dawn, they struck. Guided through flooded cane brakes, the militia waded into Chickamauga itself, a town nearly a mile long. Chiefs dragging canoe and Big Fool fled as the militia surged in. Houses burned, corn cribs were emptied.
Town after town fell. Chickamauga Town, Lookout Mountain Town, Running Water Town, Crow Town. Horses taken by the hundreds, mounts that would carry the militia home. The Chickamauga war machine was shattered in a matter of days, and word soon spread that the two hammer blows, Clark's capture of Hamilton in the west and Shelby's destruction of the river towns, had broken British power in the west. The frontier, at last, exhaled.
For the first time in years, the raids slowed, the war smoke lifted. And in that fragile calm, James Robertson moved. From his home on Big Creek, preparations quietly began. Small parties formed, supplies gathered. Before a colony could move, the land itself had to be claimed.
That spring of 1779, Robertson set out with 9 men, cutting westward toward the Cumberland. They reached the bluffs. They planted corn, raised rough cabins to mark possession. Near what would one day become the crossroads of 23rd and Park, the first proof of settlement took root. The Cumberland was no longer rumor. It was home in waiting. But Robertson needed one thing more.
Just down the river from the bluffs, where French traders still drifted in from the Ohio, he purchased a small skiff for a single guinea. Robertson and a few others boarded the skiff and headed downstream, 200 miles down the Cumberland, down the Ohio, then to the Mississippi, until he reached the Illinois country where Clark now stood victorious.
There, Robertson discussed Clark's cabin rights at French Lick. An understanding was reached. On his return, the wilderness nearly claimed him. When he reached an Indian village, he was accused of spying and marked for death, spared only when French traders convinced his captors he sought horses, not secrets. Tension softened into uneasy friendship. Before leaving, Robertson purchased fine Spanish breeding mares, prizes of the frontier, and once more traversed 500 miles through wilderness towards home. He left the horses with a Kentucky settlement. They would be reclaimed when the settlers passed back through.
Back on the Holston, the final preparations were underway. While Robertson tested the land, John Donaldson prepared the river. He consulted Colonel Evan Shelby about the French Lick, its dangers, its history, its value. Then he committed everything. With his wife and 11 members of his household, Donaldson began building boats at Long Island, with the dream of rebuilding his lost fortune.
There rose a vessel unlike any the frontier had seen. They called her Adventure, a 100-foot flatboat, armed with cannon, built to lead 30 settlers through hostile country. Some 30 other vessels were built. Over 200 souls would travel 1,000 miles along the rivers. Robertson knew the small flotilla filled with his wife, children, sister, and brothers might be safer after the attack on Dragging Canoe, aligned along the river near modern-day Chattanooga. He now wrote his resignation letter to Governor Caswell, forfeiting his role as Indian agent.
James Robertson, January 14, 1779, to Governor Caswell of North Carolina. I now beg leave to tell you that from many disadvantages to me with respect to my private property and the necessary business that now compels me to other distant parts, it is not in my power to perform the trust reposed in me, and I humbly resign that trust.
The plan was set. Robertson and the overland party would depart in late summer. Donaldson and the river flotilla would follow when winter waters rose. 2 paths, 1 destination, the Cumberland. Hopes and dreams awaited, along with tragedy.